Hey, pick up and hello. Welcome back to another episode of the Gilmore Way Podcast. I'm Kate.
And I'm Laura. And this week, the discussion about cheating on the show continues with a deep dive on Rory's early infidelities, when she kisses Jess at Suki's wedding while still dating Dean, and what we believe to be one of the biggest mistakes of her life, helping Dean cheat on Lindsay.
I literally cannot wait to get to this. So without further ado, this is your blanket spoiler warning. We are a spoilers all podcast. If you need to get off this train, now is the time. And if you could take 5 seconds to hit the like button, share this podcast with your friends, drop us a comment, and hit that subscribe button, those little things really help us out with the algorithm gods, and it lets us know what you're into so we can do more of it. All right, let's get into this, shall we? Let's start with the kiss at the wedding. Give me your initial thoughts on Jess coming back to town and showing up at the wedding and Rory kind of bumping into him, and they sort of just like fall into each other accidentally.
Yeah, I mean, at that point in time, I think especially with them having had that distance and that separation and, Rory really contending with the fact that, Dean was just not cutting it for her anymore, which is understandable. Jess showing back up was just, I think, going to be like fireworks. Once they saw each other and they realized like they were back in each other's company, I think the avoidance that they had tried to put into place with one another, and especially amongst their relationship, because Rory was still spoken for, so to say, which I hate that I even said that because it feels like ownership. But just the fact that she was in a relationship with somebody else and she didn't feel like obligated to that anymore. Something like that was inevitable. Him coming back to town as a Team Jess stan, obviously I love it. I think it was just a really awesome start to their relationship. The venue was a bit tricky, obviously because there were bigger and more important things going on that day. I wish it actually would have been not at the wedding. I wish we would have had a more intimate moment with them together once he comes back into town and they see each other, but that's what we got. That's how it was written. I think the kiss was nice. Again, I just would have liked it to have been not when she instantly just needs to be like, thank you, that was great, but also need to go, stand up at the altar right now. I have other things going on, because it felt like it shortchanged the interaction as well when this is the start of two people coming together. But what did you think about it?
I mean, it's the start of two people coming together when she is still in a relationship with a guy who was at that wedding. She was just being all affectionate with him, and then the minute she sees Jess, it's like, oh, Dean doesn't even exist. I'm just gonna act on this impulse to kiss this other guy. I mean, obviously we as the audience have seen the buildup to all of this. It's been a long time coming from that sort of initial romantic look at the Bracebridge dinner, through Jess outbidding Dean on the basket, taking the bracelet in Lost and Found, showing up with food during There's the Rub, and then like Dean fighting with Rory about that because he doesn't like him. And of course we have Rory taking off to New York when she should be at school. It was absolutely something that everyone was waiting for, but that doesn't make it okay. So, I mean, it would have been, it would have been great. It would have been great if their first kiss was the one by the gas pump with XTC playing in the background. I feel like them kissing at the wedding almost undercuts their relationship a little bit, because it's so illicit, and it, I mentioned this in the last episode, but, after the dance marathon, Jess goes to Shane before doing anything with Rory, and yet Rory didn't do the same. She didn't, stay totally quote unquote faithful. Again, I don't like using that word, but she didn't stay loyal to Dean in that moment, and she stepped outside of the bounds of their relationship in a pretty terrible way. And like, I mean, I get why it happened, and of course it's juicy for the audience. We've been waiting for that to happen for a while now, but it just feels so icky as a way to start their relationship. And if Jess was so into, I mean, granted, it was Rory who kissed him first, but if if they were so into each other, why couldn't she just quit Dean? Which brings me to those lazy, hazy, crazy days of summer when we see that she's gone for the summer and she's been writing letters to Dean, but mostly like him writing her. But she's up in the middle of the night trying to figure out what to say to Jess. You know, she's clearly working through her feelings for him. And then she comes back and sees him with someone else and gets all butthurt about it. And it's just like, excuse me, you still have a boyfriend. You don't have any claim here. So back up. And, you know, if you don't want to be with Dean anymore, don't be with Dean anymore. You're just holding on to him because it's the default option and you don't want to shake things up. But if you're done with him, just be done with him, Jess or no Jess. You don't have to go right from one to another. And Lorelai even like confronts her about this. When she finds out they kissed, she was like, what does this mean? You know, something happened. Like, be with Dean, don't be with Dean. What are you even doing here? You ran off and had something with Jess. You know, Rory is in denial, but Lorelai says it best. Kissing another guy is not being with Dean. Ask him. I bet he'd back me up on that. So I've got the whole quote here, and it's just so needed in this moment. Look, kid, you have got to make up your mind. Jess, Dean, it's enough already. If you want Jess, that's fine. Go get him. There he is. If you think that he's the great love of your life, then great. Grab a liver treat and a squeaky toy and run to him. Don't worry about that girl because I'm sure he will have moved on to somebody else in about an hour. But do something. Dean has been sweet and supportive and incredibly patient, and now you are officially treating him like dirt. And I'm sorry, but not only is that not you, he doesn't deserve that. God, I wish they knew another song.
Yeah. Kudos Lorelai. Like, not the first instance that we will get on her calling out her daughter on some crazy BS nonsense that's going on. But are we ever at all surprised? Like, this is Rory Gilmore. She is the epitome of self-centeredness and selfishness a lot of the time. And that's what we see going on here. I think it was just she was being flitty and flirtatious with both. But I think it was just because, again, she sees the guys in her life as hers and as like her property. That's, you know, we've made that very clear. So I think in her mind, you know, I might move on from Dean, but let me make sure that I have Jess solidified first, and then I'll cut the ties. So that way, like, I'm not left alone and someone's always going to be there for me and paying attention to me. And if for whatever reason it hadn't worked out with Jess, I think she would have still just defaulted to staying with Dean because it's like, well, at least someone is still paying attention to me. Like, it's all about me. Look at me. I'm Rory. Like, that's just who she is. So I don't think she saw anything wrong in her mind or understood how detrimental her actions were being. And even when her mother calls her out on it, she still is just like, well, what is the problem here? And even Lorelai's like, listen, kid, like, you're talking to, like, you know, someone who got pregnant at 16. Like, I'm pro guys, like, they're always going to be around, but like, you cannot do what you're doing. Like, it's not fair to these individuals. And so again, shout out to Lorelai in that moment. But Rory just needed to check herself on what was going on and, you know, just turn off the selfishness. But that's like asking Rory to stop breathing. So here we are, folks.
That's encoded in her DNA.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I blame her too. Like Jess did the right thing. Like at the dance marathon, you know, when he said, like, are you really officially done with Dean? And she said yes and gave him that response in that moment. He's like, okay, now I need to go take care of something. And he immediately went and broke it off with Shane and ended that before he started to then continue to make a play at Rory, which was what is fair to Shane because, you know, you can't be stringing her along as well. Rory should have done the same thing with Dean, but did not. And now it's being unfair to Dean and to Jess. Like, and just, I can't with her sometimes, as much as she's like the protagonist of our show. Oh my gosh, like I just want to shake her.
Yeah. And not only that, but she continues to be like, I mean, it's fine for her to be privately upset about it, but she is outwardly snippy about it going forward. Like, she gets all up in his grill in Haunted Leg, and he's like, I'm sorry, did I hear from you this summer? Like, are you still with Dean? Because I thought you were still with Dean. And I'm like, good job, Jess. At least you were holding her to account for this, because somebody has to. We thought Lorelai did it and we thought it stuck, but apparently not. And so it's good to see Jess, not caving and not being like, oh, okay, I'll dump her just for you, but like, will you pretty please break up with Dean? Like, he's at least like, you had your shot and I didn't receive a single carrier pigeon from you this summer. So what do you want from me? And then in one's got class and the other one dies, she is bitchy to Shane too, and is just, taking it out on Shane when, she didn't do anything wrong. Frankly, neither did Jess. They're both pretty clean in the situation, and Rory is just immaturely trying to struggle her way through these emotions and not maybe taking, like, Lorelai gave her the good advice. She's like, if you want to be with Jess, fine. Like, just cut Dean loose. Like, if you're done with Dean, be done with Dean. But Rory was not willing to cut that cord. And she needed to, like I said, Jess or no Jess. And so she just let that go on for way too long. It was like several more months before they actually broke up. And I'm like, really? Like, we could have done this sooner. This could have been so much easier. And then, yeah, dance marathon, she was horrid too. She didn't do a good job with that. And it really foreshadows some of her later behaviors. Also, including Dean and Jess. It's like, it's full circle or repeating patterns or something.
Like this much.
It's almost like she can't escape herself. And I wonder why that is.
How long do you have? We could be here for another million years.
Yeah.
But it makes me think too, like, if I was Dean, knowing what Rory did to him, as Jess was coming into the picture, at the dance marathon, at the Bit-A-Basket, all of these different encounters that they've had where he's obviously seeing the writing on the wall, how non-committed she is to him at this point in time, and how dismissive of his feelings and his emotions that she can be. Why then, as we get into season 4 and the cheating happens, is he just running back to her full speed? I understand that Lindsay is not working out. That's very clear. But you can break it off with Lindsay and either be a single dude for a little while and figure out what exactly it is you need and want. Or just, maybe there's like a third girl that comes into the picture that is not Rory, that is not Lindsay, but that is still better for you than either of those two women ever were. But the fact that he's just like tuck-tailing and running from Lindsay and just like sprinting back into Rory's bed, literally, like, did you not learn? Clearly not.
We've had this conversation. Nobody on this show learns anything ever and has that lesson actually stick. It might hold for a couple of minutes for like one situation, but then they come back to something later and it's just like, I'm sorry, have we not been here before? But, you're right. The Jess situation was handled incorrectly from top to bottom at first, and it didn't create a strong foundation for their relationship. We've talked about them a little bit before. We'll talk about them again in the future. But, their relationship was built on a foundation of lack of trust, and because it started with this Elith kiss, and they sort of hid in the shadows a little bit with their flirtations, and they wouldn't admit to Rory especially wouldn't admit to herself her feelings for him, and she let that get to the point where it took over her rational faculties and she started doing some really questionable and stupid things. So yeah, I didn't love that for any of us. And yeah, but something you said there brings me to the next point, which is kind of like the more meaty part of this episode. I feel like the kiss with Jess is just that sort of like first peek into Rory's, like you said, almost entitlement to men, and her feelings of ownership over them regardless of their relationship status. But, why did Dean run back to Rory? And that brings us to their eventual return to each other in season 4 once he's a married man. One, yeah, you're right. He probably should have taken some time between girlfriends to figure some stuff out, maybe be single for a little bit, do some maturing, live his own life. But instead, he got right back into another relationship with another girl and married her, and was like, you know what, this sounds like a great idea. Like, she's cool. She must be the one for me. It's not like there are other women out there outside of Stars Hollow. It's preposterous. So, yeah, might have avoided a lot of problems if he had just had a little more maturity, and or his parents had talked him out of it. Looking at you, Foresters and Listers. Don't know why you allowed that to happen. But running back to Rory is an interesting dynamic because, once again, going back to our beloved Esther Perel, another quote from her: "The flicker with an old flame offers a unique combination of built-in trust, risk-taking, and vulnerability. It is a magnet for our lingering nostalgia." So we've talked about nostalgia in the past and how powerful of a feeling that is. And, we have this conversation between Rory and Lane at the end of season 4 when she's sort of explaining how she feels differently about Dean and Jess after they've both sort of showed up for her, but in very different ways after the pub crawl that never was, where Dean comes to get her and then Jess shows up at her dorm room. And, she says that Dean makes her feel safe and Jess was just too unpredictable and he abandoned her. And so they're both in this place where things are hard, adult emotions are too big, they're floundering, they're feeling this connection with each other, and they're hearkening back to a time in their lives when things were simpler and the love was easy. And it's really easy to fall back into a relationship like that. Like, you'd be surprised how many times people cheat with their own ex. It's not always a stranger in a bar or whatever. It's not always somebody new. A lot of times people will go back to a prior flame for that reason, for the combo of built-in trust and risk-taking. Like, affairs are inherently exhilarating. And so in this way, they're both able to, feel that rush of emotion and excitement, but with somebody that they trust. Rory says it to Lorelai after she's been caught, and she's like, "Aren't you happy that my first time was with someone sweet who's good to me?" And so I think they have this lingering sense of connection that allows them to justify and rationalize this to themselves, because it's like, well, we love each other and they're a good person and I trust them. But
even still at that time, like, first off, it's still only a few years apart. These are still two essentially like babies. Dean is just like fresh out of like, the cradle running into a marriage. And so like, I get it how like, even when you're 16 and this is your first relationship, the relationship and the love is going to come easy because you don't have responsibilities yet. You both are still in school. You're not needing to like make a living, pay rent, have a mortgage, have all those bills yet. So your time and your money essentially is just at your disposal to pretty much do whatever you want with it, with just no, again, overarching responsibilities that are just going to like weigh on you at the end of the day. I think any high school relationships are going to be easy for that reason alone. But even when Dean, is walking away from his marriage with Lindsay, it's like, you're still both 19 years old. You don't know what the world is yet. Rory is like going to college, so she's not, going to have an income. She's still just being fully funded by Emily and Richard for everything. And I think that even within his relationship with Rory and his marriage with Lindsay, I think Dean is still coming out of this having no concept of what true love for a person actually is. in a romantic capacity at the very least, which is dangerously problematic. It's one of the reasons why he should have never gotten married, because I don't think Dean Forrester knows what love is and what loving a person is. And so I think he didn't find that level of fulfillment with Lindsay, and they broke up for other reasons as well, and that marriage dissolved for other reasons. But it doesn't mean that it's good for you to come running back to Rory and thinking, I can re-spark this flame and have that love come back. It's not going to work that way for the two of them. Relationships, I've heard of instances where, or high school sweethearts, people break up, get married later in life, like decades later when they re-find each other. Fine. It can work, and it has. But in this instance, I feel like Dean was just lonely coming off of this failed marriage. And that's why he did go back to Rory, because I have that trust that was previously established with her. She's going to cure my loneliness at the end of the night. And maybe we can pick back up with whatever he thinks he has with her at that moment in time, which these two people, as of that moment, it's like, you don't love each other. You're just filling a void right now. And this is really scary.
Yeah. Sometimes affairs can be a fantasy escape. It's a fantasy solution to a problem, but it's not going to work in reality, right? So it seems like an oasis from a troubled marriage for him. Obviously he and Lindsay are not on the same page with a lot of stuff, and he's bearing a lot of the burden of supporting them as a couple. And so his sort of little like respites with Rory are a breath of fresh air to him almost. She's something outside of that relationship that he can look to for support and encouragement and discussion, just anything that he maybe feels like he's not getting with Lindsay, because their priorities are different and their lifestyles are seeming to clash, because she wants to be a stay-at-home wife, I guess, not a mother yet because they don't have kids, but and he's out working 3 jobs to make sure that she has what she wants, a new car and a townhouse. That's a huge responsibility for him, and it's easier to try to escape that through the sort of like back doorway with stepping out on the marriage than it is to have that conversation, especially as someone who's emotionally immature, as 2 19-year-olds are. And so it doesn't surprise me in the slightest. But why don't we talk about the actual scene? Especially the bit that gets me the most is right after the fact, when Rory is talking to Lorelai, and she says, it's not working out between them. They're not happy. He tried the best he could. It didn't work. It's over. And then Lorelai is pushing her on this. It's like, did he say he's leaving her for you? Like, are they, like, he's moving out. They're getting divorced. He's got a lawyer. They've divided up the monster truck season tickets. She's asking these questions that Rory hadn't contemplated before. And Rory's getting agitated by this, and this is when we get he's Dean, my Dean. Obviously, I think we've referenced it in each episode in this series thus far. And she says he took the ring off, that he's in love with her and not Lindsay, that she's not good for him. She lets him quit school and work himself to death. And then Lorelai is like, no, you can't be one of those girls who blames the wife for forcing the husband to cheat. And has to remind her, yes, this is cheating. Just because he told you that he wants to leave her doesn't mean he's left her. It doesn't mean it's time for you to jump into bed with this guy, no matter if you had him first. You dumped him. You chose someone else. You made your bed, and now you're sleeping with him in it. And it's such a great scene. So, like, is there anything about that scene that stands out to you that you really want to talk about here?
Yeah, I mean, first off, we've said it in one of our first parts of this cheating series. Legally divorcing yourself from somebody and untying yourself in that way can take a lot of time. So it would have been okay for that to have happened if, like, yeah, like what Lorelai said, the lawyers are in place, the paperwork has been signed, they're not living together anymore. Foundationally, like they're just completely done. That was not the case here. So it was right on for Lorelai to pose those questions. And Rory is squirming, as she should, because she knows, like, I'm being called out. I don't like it. I'm being called out by Lorelai, which I don't like even more. And on top of that, she innately knows that she's oopsie doopsie, muffed it up again. And what also gets me is that in the immediate aftermath, Dean spends a couple of seconds outside of the kitchen door overhearing this conversation too. So he's now instantly reckoning with how you messed up too, dude. And now you're about to go back. You're literally going back home to Lindsay right now. She's going to be there waiting for you with brownies. Like,
with gummy bears in them. And she even says, like, I'm 5 or something, or, something to that effect, where it's like, it's really pointing out not only how young they are, but how young everybody is treating them as well.
Mm-hmm. But I mean, maybe rightly so, because again, these two people were very immature, should have never been married. We've talked about it. But I think it was a really good writing decision and moment to have Dean outside of that kitchen door overhearing this, because you need to reckon with, like, you're going back home to a woman who, loves you in her own way, definitely has genuine care for you. I mean, this is still your wife right now. And you have to go home and contend with that. And we see him go home and he obviously can't. And all he does is just lash out at Lindsay and get mad at her for answering the phone, for just trying to be cool, calm, and collected despite what is going on within their marriage. And all he does is just blow up on her. And she's begging him to stop. She says, I don't want to fight. And he just can't work through any of it. And it's just immature because, again, at this moment in time, I think he's so done with the relationship, and that's okay. But you can't just fall back on Rory and then snap at your wife because of it. Like, just none of this is okay. And so, we've talked about it. Justice for Lindsay Lister. She deserved so much better, but also good on Lorelai for calling Rory out on her nonsense. And Rory knows. She goes outside and she just starts crying because she knows, like, she has done what is probably going to be and ends up being irreparable damage. But it also stays with her, I think, down the line. Her behavior doesn't really ever change or get better immediately. She just doesn't learn from it. Again, our characters don't learn anything ever.
Yeah. Just a couple months ago, she's all up in Paris's grill for sleeping with Asher while she's in a relationship. And yet suddenly it's okay for her to sleep with someone who's technically married.
He's mine.
Something about pots and kettles and whatnot. But speaking of that, justice for Lindsay, what Lorelai says there, you can't be one of those girls who blames the wife for forcing the husband to cheat. What's your take on that?
I mean, Lindsay had her part to play in that marriage dissolving. Those two people definitely could have been more or have done more to try and salvage whatever was left of their marriage at that point in time.
Therapy.
Yeah. Everybody in this show, literally every single person in this show, just needs massive amounts of therapy. But I will credit Lorelai again, like, because Rory is just trying to, again, play the I'm holier than thou game. I'm up on this pedestal. Like, I didn't force Dean to cheat. He did that on his own volition because his marriage with Lindsay is floundering. You still had a part to play in that too. Lindsay didn't know what's going on in your room at this moment in time. No one made Dean do what he did other than, like, that was just his own personal choice in that moment. So Lorelai is absolutely right to call Rory out on her just, once again, trying to pass the buck in terms of, like, I'm not to blame here, because if Lindsay had been better in the marriage, Dean wouldn't have felt the need to come to me. And there's a part of that that's true, but it doesn't absolve Rory of blame, which is what she's just trying to do in that moment to make herself feel better. And Lorelai rightly knocks her down a peg and says, like, listen, you should feel bad right now because what you've done is just reprehensible.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. I tend to have the feeling or the philosophy that whenever cheating occurs, both partners had some part to play in it. There's maybe an imbalance in terms of who is maybe doing more or doing less in contribution to that dynamic. And in this case, I don't know how much Lindsay actually did wrong, per se. It's hard to say, but it seems like she has really high expectations for him and for this fairy tale life that she thought she's found herself in. And when it doesn't go exactly to plan, conflict ensues. And it's not good for them. That's not a healthy relationship. But at the same time, it does seem like she's trying, you know? She wants them to be together. She wants them to go out and do things and have couple friends and have a social life. But she's too immature to recognize that him working 3 jobs while she sits at home is contributing to an imbalance in their home life that makes it hard for that to be a reality. It's not an equal partnership. And so I don't want to blame her, but I also, like, I don't want to use the victim terminology. Like, everyone treats her as the victim. But again, we don't know what happened behind closed doors. We don't know that she's not worse than she's portrayed. I mean, obviously, Dean, I think, is the wrong, the party who is most in the wrong in this, because he is the one who is married. He is the one who has taken the vows. He is the one who has decided to step out. He is the one who manipulated Rory. And not only did he lie to her, but he did so for her first sexual encounter, which is really, really bad. So I think Dean is obviously the one that we need to point the finger at the most here. But yeah, Rory doesn't take enough accountability for her own part in this. She takes no responsibility in the early reactions with Lorelai there. She doesn't even seem to register what has happened until she goes to talk to Lane about it. And Lane is just sort of sitting.
That was going to be my next question. So
yeah. Lane is like, ooh, cool. Like, she just lets her get off scot-free. How do you feel about that?
No. I mean, and I think it, again, just stems from, like, Lane is still just, that girl does not know any better. And it's just because she hasn't really entered into, like, the dating scene yet herself, you know, definitely a result of her upbringing. But even that, like, there should have been, like, even, like, 1% or just, like, you know, just a shred of perception for Lane to just be like, no, that's not okay. Like, I know you're my best friend, but again, Dean's married. Did you think about that or question it? And Lane, I think, gives Rory the response that she wanted from Lorelai, where she was just like, okay, well, you know, how was it? Was he nice to you? Did he make you feel safe? You know, and Rory was like, yeah, like all of those things. Like, and it was actually really nice. You know, I trust Dean. I love him. It was a really sweet and special moment. And Lane's just like, okay, then, well, you know, I guess we're good. And it's like, no, girl, no. Like, again, I get that you're just, you don't know any better. You don't know the first thing about relationships yourself and how to advise your friends on them. But I think anyone with, like, just any sort of brain cells, and Lane certainly has them, just needs to be like, he's married.
Yeah.
No.
It's a pretty obvious problem here. Yeah, Rory, we shouldn't snap to the judgment that Rory is evil, right? I don't think we need to go there. But I mean, Lorelai does a pretty good job at it, and Lane should have been better. But Rory needed to have a reckoning with the impact she had on everyone's feelings, and she never does. And like, nobody else, I don't know if it's just because nobody else knows or what, but like, Stars Hollow knows everything. They knew within 5 minutes that she had broken up with Dean, and yet nobody seems to know about this, despite the very public blow up in the square, which we'll get to in a minute. But like, not a single soul chimed in when they found out Rory cheated with Dean. Not a snarky word or a look from Babette, Patty, Luke, none of it. Nobody gave a flying F, because like, Rory's the golden child angel and Lindsay is the devil. Lindsay is unimportant. Her feelings are of no consequence to anyone, and Rory gets away with everything.
Yeah. I mean, and again, justice for Lindsay, but it's just where this town is just perpetuating a really unhealthy rhetoric to Rory that, like, she can never do any wrong. We're just going to excuse all of her misgivings. You know, the fact that their second time then, happens in Miss Patty's studio, I could even see Miss Patty just being like, nice girl, nice. And it's like, no, we can't continue to condone this behavior. But nobody gets on Rory. And it just makes, for the viewer, like, we're left to just sort of like castrate Lindsay almost, and just like harp on her for the way that she caused this to happen. And so Lindsay definitely is to blame within her own marriage for it not being successful, but she's not to blame for what Rory and Dean do together. And so I think we can really confuse that as viewers and just cast this unnecessary blame on her, when really we should be coming again down harder on Dean, especially on Rory, and give Lindsay a little bit of the benefit of the doubt here, because she is still a married woman whose husband just cheated on her. That's going to stay with her, especially like with this being your first marriage and such a young one at that for the rest of your life. That's the outcome of your first marriage at 18, just having your husband cheat with his ex and then lie to you about it and never, be forthcoming with anything. How is, like, if you think like it's just going to stay with her for life, and it's going to really affect her ability to try and have healthy and normal relationships going forward.
Yeah, it is. You're, like you said, it's really going to stick with her. But this reminds me of a quote that was from State of Affairs, just now sitting there. I meant to put it up there before, but now it's there. It's actually originally a quote by Alexandre Dumas Père. I'm paraphrasing because it's in another set of notes, but the gist of the quote is, the chains of matrimony are so heavy that it takes two to carry them, sometimes three. And I think 2 19-year-olds were not strong enough in any way, shape, or form to carry those chains themselves. They didn't understand the magnitude and the weight of what they were getting into. They just thought it was a fun party. And like, oh, we're married. It's so exciting. When, there's really so much more to it. And that was what made space for the third and invited trouble into their relationship. And it's a hard lesson to learn that way, for that to be your experience. So it's rough. But what about Lindsay's reaction? So obviously we see Lorelai and Suki walking through the square, and we see them fighting through the window, and we can hear her screaming at him like, there's a lot you could have done, and you know what? You didn't do it. And Dean's being like, I'm sorry. Can we do something? Can we get over this? It'll never happen again. What do you think of the fallout? And okay, as part of that question, obviously we know that Rory pieced out to Europe because she could. So once again, a Gilmore girl running away from her problems and just ghosting on everyone. Mm-hmm. And so she takes off to Europe. She writes Dean a letter, has Lorelai deliver it. I can't believe Lorelai got herself into this. I mean, I understand why she does it, but also like, why are you participating in this? And is it condoning it too much? But the letter is found. Okay. Pro tip: if you're gonna cheat, don't leave a paper trail. God, idiots. So she finds the,
Literally.
yeah. I mean, I'm joking for legal reasons. I'm joking, but yeah. So obviously, it all culminates in this letter that is found by Lindsay, and this is the reaction we get. This is the ultimate fallout. Talk to me about it.
I mean, she's devastated, but I feel even worse for her because she's still so young and so juvenile within her marriage that she can't really, I think, even understand or fathom how bad it is and how wrong it is. And that's where I think even her mother needs to step in on her daughter's behalf and call Rory out on this, because I think Lindsay is just too meek almost to chew Rory out as she should be for this moment in time. And I think Lindsay is just so stunned and so hurt and so devastated, but again, combined with the meekness that she's just like, I'm just gonna we'll just get through the divorce, and we'll try and do better next time, and do better next time. And that's when I think her mother needs to wake up her daughter, which I think she tries to do with Lindsay, and just say, like, listen, Rory needs to be called out on this. She slept with your husband. You cannot take that lying down. Like, you can't just roll over on it and pretend like it didn't happen and not take Rory to task for it. And so I just commend Lindsay's mom for what she did, but I think Lindsay just needed to have a backbone there and just really go to bat for herself, because her marriage is destroyed, again, largely stemming from the fault of two other people. And it's like she was doing everything she could to make it work. She just needed to do more and stand up for herself more in all of these moments.
It just goes to show how immature and ill-equipped she was to handle this kind of emotion and confrontation. The fact that she had to have her mommy kind of do it for her. Just, if you look at it, it's sort of like, Rory's talking to Lorelai, and then the rest of the scene is all Teresa talking to Lorelai. Rory and Lindsay say nothing until the screaming is over. And it just goes to show how young these people are, and how they don't have the skills to work through this kind of thing in a manner that allows for appropriate confrontation and repair. It's a set of skills that's difficult to learn, and it takes time and experience and pain and work. And that's why a lot of people are waiting until much later in life now, until they have more communication skills and more conflict resolution skills to even contemplate getting married, because it's not just as simple as happily ever after running off into the sunset. And this proves that. But yeah, that scene of them in the square is interesting, and I want to go through some of the lines and point out some things that really jumped out at me. Teresa's mom, or sorry, her name is Teresa, Lindsay's mom, says, "You should be ashamed of yourself, what you did. What did she ever do to you, huh? How did she hurt you? Why are you doing this? Calm down. My little girl has to come home and find your heinous letter in Dean's jacket. You little monster. There aren't hundreds of other boys in the world. You have to go after her husband?" And so what jumps out to me about that is she uses the word little twice within 10 seconds. My little girl, you're referring to a married adult. I mean, granted, a daughter will probably always be her mom's and her dad's little girl. I get that terminology, but still, like, think about the way you're talking about your adult daughter to other people here. And then she refers to Rory as a little monster, which again is like diminutive towards, like, it's, I don't think that's the right word, but you know what I mean. It's like, it's making Rory feel small and young, which in a lot of ways she is. She's also an adult, but she is a young adult who is still inexperienced in these things. And she just goes in for the attack, calling her a monster, just ad hominems, just like, again, not even considering that maybe her daughter had a part to play in this. Maybe she knows more than we do, and it's not a fair assessment to put any blame on Lindsay. But, and then the next bit is Lorelai standing up for Rory, saying, "Stop attacking my daughter right now. You're upset. I get it, but you do not do this." She's right about that. Frankly, you don't just yell at people in the square. That it's kind of an immature reaction from Teresa as well. You know, there was a better way to handle that. I understand that the tensions are running high, but like, this is Stars Hollow, where that will get you in the gossip columns forever.
East Side Tilly's gonna have a field day.
I know, right? "She slept with my son-in-law. She broke up a marriage. Are you proud?" Is that now attacking Lorelai? Like, you raised this girl. Look what you did. And she's like, "She didn't break up a marriage. What do you know of this? Enough. I know Rory." And like, did Rory break up a marriage? Or do you think this was like doomed to, like, if they hadn't slept together, what do you think would have happened with Dean and Lindsay?
I mean, did Rory break up the marriage? No, Dean did. That's the first answer to that, like, to your first question.
He's the only one who could, really, because he's the only one in the marriage. It was his actions and his decisions that precipitated that. So I agree with you.
Yeah. But to answer your second question, what would have happened, you know, if they hadn't slept together and had that encounter? I think they would have stayed in the marriage in a very unhealthy way, because we've talked about this before, but Dean and Lindsay seem to have been raised by, like, you know, your typical American, like, nuclear family unit. I mean, look at damn Donna Reed. You know, Dean comments right and left about how, you know, oh, it's nice to just, you know, come home after a day of work and your wife has dinner, like, you know, waiting on the table for you. And, you know, what's wrong with aspiring to that? And then just, you know, wanting to, you know, have a couple kids and, you know, have a nice simple life like that and just live within that nuclear family unit. I think Lindsay was definitely raised the same way. Case in point, we see her going to the butcher and all she's really concerned about, she's like, "I just want to be able to make a nice roast for my husband. Like, please just help me and tell me how." And it's like, they're just trying to live in that idyllic fantasy life of just, my husband's going to go to work. I'm going to have dinner on the table when he comes home. And so I think that's why, despite all of the problems that they were having and the fact that their marriage was no longer good or healthy for either of them, I think at least in the short term, they would have just continued to remain present within the marriage when they shouldn't. The fights would have probably just, you know, continued to be a constant thing, with Lindsay just feeling dissatisfied that she's not able to get out, Dean feeling like he's overworked and overtaxed. But I don't think they were mature enough at that moment in time to realize this is actually something that you should probably either, like you said, go to therapy for and try and work out. And if you can't do that, or you're unwilling to do that, then consider parting ways within this relationship. But I don't think they were ever going to be mature enough to do it. So I think they would have stayed in it until, again, we like alluded to this in a previous episode, until you step on that landmine and your marriage just implodes.
Yeah. All of that is true. Another thing that stands out to me about that confrontation is Lorelai defending Rory. Even though she was the first one to call her out, she says to Teresa, like, "I know that Rory wasn't responsible for this because I know Rory." She knows that Rory doesn't have ill intention and doesn't want to break up that marriage. She was duped into thinking it was already over. But at the same time, that ignores the reality that regardless of what she was told, her meddling in Dean's relationship, which started before they ever slept together, like, there was buildup to this over time for months, of her inappropriately interacting with her ex and giving her opinions where they weren't asked for. That meddling was a direct contributor to Dean's actions and the outburst and the divorce, regardless. And her letter, regardless of what it said, Lorelai was like, oh, well, that was a good letter because it was Rory saying, hey, you need to work on your own ish, and I'm taking myself out of the mix. She's like, that's a good letter. And I think she's too understanding and she's too accepting of Dean and Rory 3.0 after this. It's like, I know you want your daughter to be happy and you don't want to meddle in her affairs, especially now that she's an adult. But I think maybe not taking a stronger stand on this is a mistake.
Yeah, Lorelai definitely needed to counsel her daughter a little bit better there and say, like, listen, I'm going to defend you against Teresa when she's attacking you unnecessarily. I'll still take you to task for what you did, sleeping with a married man, because that was just not okay. But that doesn't mean I'm also going to condone you getting back together, even if they sign those divorce papers and Lindsay and Dean go their separate ways. It's been proven to me, and I've seen why your relationship really can't work and why you shouldn't try to make it work. So you make an excellent point that I think she wants for Rory's happiness, and that's a good thing for any parent to have for their child. But you can't counsel that happiness when you're just placing your daughter back into a relationship that's just not good for her. That's not good for Dean. So she really just needed, I think, to step in and say, you made a mistake. You've owned up to it. Hopefully you will learn from it, but you cannot get back with Dean.
She even says it after she catches them and says, what if he doesn't leave her? Like, now you're all emotionally involved. And ultimately, in the end, Dean didn't leave Lindsay for Rory. I mean, maybe he might have eventually, but like the fact that he just sort of like went home to her and pretended like nothing was wrong and didn't just initiate a conversation about like, look, I'm unhappy and I no longer want to be in this marriage. He didn't do that. And Rory even asked him about it later, like, if Lindsay hadn't found the letter, would you still have left her for me? I'm not so sure that he would have. And then we have her going to him at the end of A Messenger, Nothing More. And he's like, I was married, Rory, married. And I threw it all away for someone who dumped me once and then just bailed on me. I hurt everybody. I hurt Lindsay. I hurt her parents. I hurt my parents. And now I'm back home and you're in Europe with your grandmother. And what the hell was I thinking? I mean, what am I doing? What's wrong with me? And one, how did you not think about this beforehand? Can you not keep it in your pants long enough for you to like have a rational thought about that and like consider that your actions will impact the emotions and well-being of others? Wow. But also,
he could not.
Right? But also just the sort of like deflection of blame where it's just like, I did this and then you took off, like putting some of that back on Rory. And I'm like, well, yeah, Rory's conflict avoidant and avoidant in general with stuff like this. But that's not the real problem here. The real problem is you lying to everyone and manipulating her into bed. So it's like, instead of I effed up by cheating, it's more like we shouldn't have done this because you left me. And so why would I believe we'd work now? And I'm just like, whew, hooey, that is some emotional backflipping.
Therapy. Not even couples therapy at that point. Just the both of you. Just therapy.
Yeah. Individually and together. Yeah. It's just such a terrible situation all around. And I don't love it. It was juicy AF when I first watched it, but the more I watch those episodes and break them down, and the more I read about the sociology and anthropology of human interaction and relationships and sex and cheating, the more I'm just like, oh man, wow. Either the writers have no idea what they're doing when it comes to writing relationships like this that are instructive, I mean, granted, not all media has to be instructive, but like stories should say something and they should have a message at some level. You know, like even if that message is anarchism or, you know, or something anti-establishment or, you know, like everything has a perspective. And yet this show is so good at doing this, where they give us something big and juicy and complex, and then they just brush right over it, never to be dealt with again.
Yeah, because I'll say this, like, think about this scenario, and Gilmore Girls PG'd it down extensively. But I could absolutely, like, you would see this same situation on, like, Jerry Springer, where the wife comes in and she's like, she slept with my husband. And then the wife's mom is coming in and being like, I can't believe you did that. You name calling, you know, how dare you? The moms are coming in on behalf of the kids. The dude's just over there being like, but I like the both of them. And she was my old love. And the women are just, you know, fighting it out. And just the fact that you could envision that scenario on a show like that, where that show is meant to just unfortunately publicize people's really tragic personal lives, you know, just in a way where we mock it and we make fun of it, because then we look down on those people and say like, oh, they're trashy, and thank goodness we're not like that, and we have that level of morality over them. But it just highlights how problematic that scenario was, and just like you said, how the writing just really toned it down to not showcase how detrimental everything that happened truly was.
Yeah, I mean, I get that it's the WB, and maybe there are certain things that you can't do or say or show explicitly, but what you can show is people taking responsibility for their actions and having real confrontations with people and working through problems in a constructive way. And that was like literally never done on this show. Or anytime it got close, it was extremely shallow and not really contending with what's going on. So I keep pointing out examples of it. And this is one of them. But I think it would have been so great to have a real confrontation between Lindsay and Rory. We have their moms doing all of the talking for them, and I think that really reduces their agency and takes away their voice, even though they're young and maybe they don't know how to work through this properly. It sucks to have someone speak for you all the time, and they shouldn't need their mommies to do this for them by this point. If this is how they want to be treated as adults, then they better start learning how to act like them and facing their problems head on. I would love a scenario like we got in Sex and the City. Spoilers for Sex and the City, if you haven't seen it yet. Carrie cheats with her married ex, and then they're caught in, like, Big has gone to work and Natasha comes home. She was not expected to come home. And Carrie is still at the house. She hasn't left yet. And Natasha finds her there and is like, I knew it. I knew you were cheating. I knew this was happening, but I didn't think it was happening in my house. And then Natasha gets injured while chasing Carrie down a set of stairs. And it's very dramatic. It's heartbreaking to watch. But then eventually, Carrie and Natasha have, like, Carrie actually kind of sees her at a restaurant and sits down with her and tries to have a conversation with her. And it doesn't go very well, but at least Carrie tries to talk to her about it and tries to consider the feelings of the wife. You know, I find there's sort of like an interesting divide between when we root for the other woman, in this case, Carrie, because, you know, Big is the one true pairing for her, theoretically. And when we see, or when we're rooting for the partner, and the other woman is, like, I like the way Esther Perel puts it, when, you know, she's not even considered. It happens a lot in therapy where therapists will try to close the loop around the couple as soon as possible. And the third person in that couple, if you will, is completely ignored. It is, you know, affairs are treated as though there are two people in the couple when really it's now a triangle. There are three people here. And the third person, the other woman or other man, depending on the scenario, is more pathogen than person. And I love that, where it's just like they're a problem that needs to be dealt with, not a human being with feelings who might have something to contribute to the reparation of this relationship or however it moves forward in whatever way that works. And, you know, in this case, we're kind of sympathizing with Carrie as the other woman because watching her and Big get back together is just so steamy that it's kind of hard not to be entranced by it. But that confrontation with Natasha on her lunch break is just like, oh my heart. Like it's so hard to watch. But at least she tried, you know, she tried to have this conversation and be like, is there a way to make this okay? I'm extremely sorry. Like, there's no apology from Rory to Lindsay. There's no expression of her feelings from Lindsay to Rory. You know, some sort of reckoning between the two of them would have been really satisfying to watch.
I concur. And we talked about it before. A for accountability. And Gilmore Girls misses the mark. They were not even close to hitting that bullseye.
Once again.
Yep.
Yeah, it's just a mess all around for them. And I don't love the way they handled it. I don't love her getting back with Dean. Their whole like third iteration of their relationship is so uncomfortable to watch that half the time I just skip those episodes. I hate the episode where they find Dean's mom is shouting at them like, we're gonna go to bed and I have to set the alarm. Like that whole thing is so cringy. And then the episode where they go on the double date with Luke and Lorelai, oh, that's so uncomfy. And I hate watching it. I almost always skip over Pippi Virgin. And then, you know, he just bitches out on her. B is for bitching. Just bitches out on her after the male Yale party because he's insecure about her lifestyle and the kinds of people that she's associating with now. And then not only that, but he comes back later and does the whole like Stars Hollow Museum thing and confronts Luke about him not being good enough for Lorelai. And it's just this like awkward projection of his teenage angst onto grown-ass Luke. And just Dean in season 5 is just thank you, next. No, I'm done. I'm out. Stop this. Like, scrub it from my brain. I never want to see it again.
Yeah. And it was just, especially what you said about Dean calling Rory out, where he's like, I'm never going to, you know, fit into your world. And it's like, it's not about not fitting into her world. You know, granted that there is, you know, the disparity within the social class. But at that point in time, it was just, you two are not good together. And instead of just recognizing that, you're then still trying to say, oh, well, it's just because you're privileged and I'm not. And it's like, I'm sure that factored in. I'm not dismissing it. But again, just own up to the fact that it is not about even the privilege anymore and just placing full blame on that. It's just about you two are not right to one another. You need to stop trying and just go your separate ways now and live your life. That's it.
Yeah. I don't know. I hate season 5, Dean. And on top of it, just like, I feel like this is my last thought. I've kind of alluded to it already, but just the fact that he manipulated Rory into this, you know, that he lied to her to make this happen. Like, oh, that moment when they're sitting there in her bed, I think it's the season 5 opener when he's like, you know, as the guy, I was trying not to be too much of a pig. And I'm like, well, too late, buddy, because you were a pig the moment you lied to get her into bed and said that your marriage was over when you haven't taken a single step in that direction. I could forgive him if he hadn't moved out yet because they're young and they don't have enough money. I could forgive him if they haven't been to a divorce lawyer yet. But he has to have at least had that conversation with Lindsay where he's like, this isn't working. We're unable to make this work. We've tried everything. It's over. Goodbye. I'll move out as soon as I can. Like, we'll just have to awkwardly cohabit for like a couple weeks until I can find a new place or get my stuff out of here and move home. Like, just, it can be really hard to come to terms with how someone who makes you feel safe and comfortable can also be someone who lies to you about it being over with his wife and cheating without being fully aware of that. Like, that's a huge betrayal unto itself. And Rory just lets him get away with it and gets back together with him. And that's a huge mistake on both of their parts. And it's, I don't want to say unforgivable, because I feel like there are a few things that are truly, truly unforgivable, but this gets close.
Yeah, I concur. Everyone just needed to do better. That's really, I think, the takeaway.
Yeah. And on that note, I think we should wrap this part up here. We've gone just over an hour. I think that's perfect. We still have part 4 coming up next week where we talk about Rory and Logan. I have a feeling this is the part where it's going to get truly contentious. Last week, we disagreed for once. This week, we were pretty on the same page, pretty simpatico. But next week, Team Jess versus Team Logan are going to have some thoughts about this. And I definitely have receipts and I got the goods, I think, on this one. So come back for that because it's going to be excellent. It's going to be so good. I've been waiting for this for so long. I've literally been working on this document for like 2 years.
It's like the Nashville hot chicken level of spicy, folks. Come back.
Yeah. This is like Carolina Reaper up in this bitch.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
right.
I can't wait.
So, Laura, talk to me about Connecticut.
In case you haven't heard, there is this wonderful event called the Firelight event that is taking place in Guilford, Connecticut in October this fall. If you are a GG fan, this is the weekend for you. You have the opportunity to meet cast and crew, interact with the best fandom base who love the show just as much as we do. Trivia, bingo, just lunch and dinners.
Gilmore's Against Humanity, maybe.
Yeah, which we will probably be hosting again, which is our take on, what do you mean? Gilmore's Against Humanity, XYZ. There are so many fun games. It's an incredible weekend, gorgeous scenery. Again, great people. If you are interested in learning more about that, we will include a link to the website for that event below. Please check it out and consider buying a ticket to this event. I promise you will not be disappointed. It is just a weekend that is still months away for us, but that we're already planning for and just so excited about. And we hope that you will join us and see us there.
I feel like even if we don't actually do like a panel presentation or a game presentation, I want to bring like a physical copy of Gilmore's Against Humanity because it was so much fun to produce. And I want to play it regardless. So like, even if it's just us and a couple of our friends roped into it, come find us and maybe like play some Gilmore's Against Humanity.
Yeah. Again, we'll include a link in the description to that below. Just check it out, consider buying a ticket. And if you have any questions about it, definitely drop us an email, leave a comment on this video. We're more than happy to talk about that weekend if you have any questions about it or want more info.
Yeah. And on your way out, if you haven't already, hit that like button, subscribe, drop us a comment about your thoughts about what we talked about tonight. Maybe leave us some teasers of your thoughts about Rory and Logan. And if we get some good ones, maybe we can even talk about them in the future. Share this with your friends. Go pet a dog or a cat in your case. I'm surprised we haven't had Vinny making too many vocal appearances in these episodes yet. But
I feel like it is.
Yeah.
It is now. I'll say that.
Can only go so long without your cat interfering with anything you do. But yeah, come back next week. It's gonna stay spicy, and we're really excited to catch up with you again next Friday night for dinner.
Take care, everyone. Have a good weekend.
Buonanotte.